The shoreline was alive with firelight, torches casting long shadows across the jagged rocks. Strange alien towers loomed in the distance, their spires flickering with unknown energies that pulsed like distant hearts. Daniel knelt at the center of it all, sweat glistening on his bare skin, as the bowl of flame before him roared higher with every whispered chant. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, their alien gazes piercing, weighing his worth in silence. The fire rite had been described to him as a ceremony of respect, something he thought would be little more than symbolic gestures, a test of endurance, maybe a show of faith. He hadn't expected the intensity. The flames licked upward, hotter and wilder than any earthly blaze, yet he held steady, his hands hovering close to the bowl, resisting the urge to flinch. Pain was nothing new to him, but here it was being measured, judged. Around him stood the alien priesthood, their tall purple frames marked with spiraling tattoos that glowed faintly in the firelight. Their leader, an elder with eyes like molten amber, leaned on a staff topped with carved bone. The elder's voice was calm yet thunderous, carrying words Daniel could half understand, thanks to the translator graft behind his ear. The fire chooses. If you endure, you are one of us. Daniel clenched his jaw, focusing not on the fire, but on the rhythm of his own breathing. He thought of his training, the battles he had fought, the survival drills back on Earth. This was no different. Pain was temporary, resolve eternal. Yet something in the elder's tone unsettled him. The way he said one of us sounded less like welcome and more like a chain waiting to be clasped around his throat. Behind the priesthood, warriors stood in ranks, their skin shades of violet and indigo, weapons strapped across their backs. They were not watching idly. Their eyes burned with challenge, suspicion, even hunger. Daniel knew they didn't want him here. He was an outsider, a human who had come to negotiate trade and peace. But the only way through was this ritual. He had no choice. The fire surged, crackling with unnatural intensity. Sparks danced up into the night, carried away by the sea breeze that smelled faintly of metal and salt. Daniel's muscles trembled, but he held fast, his hands refusing to retreat from the heat. Whispers rippled through the gathered crowd, surprised at the human's stubbornness. Few among them had endured this long. Then, movement at the edge of his vision caught his eye. A figure stepped forward from the watching circle. A woman, tall, her skin a deep violet, marked with pale glowing lines that swirled like constellations. Her hair was silver white, cascading down her back in waves that shimmered under the firelight. She was unlike the others, her bearing regal, her eyes sharp and knowing. She did not chant. She simply watched him. Her gaze made the fire hotter, or perhaps it only felt that way. Daniel blinked, trying to focus, but her presence gnawed at his concentration. She was beautiful in a way that was both alien and undeniable, her curves framed by a garment, woven from dark fabric that clung to her, yet flowed with every motion. When her eyes met his, there was no hostility, only assessment, as though she was measuring something the others could not see. The elder's voice rose again, breaking the silence. "The fire accepts him," he declared, slamming his staff against the stone. The flame shifted, narrowing into a steady blue light that enveloped Daniel's hands without burning. Gasps filled the crowd. The human had not only endured, he had been chosen. Daniel exhaled sharply, sweat dripping down his brow as he finally drew his hands back. His palms were unburned, though the memory of the heat lingered like an echo in his bones. He thought this was the end, that the trial was over. Relief surged through him, though it was short-lived, because the elder was still speaking, and the crowd was reacting with wild surprise. "The fire does not simply accept him," the elder said, his voice trembling with reverence. "It binds him." He turned toward the violet-skinned woman with silver hair, extending a hand. "The flame has chosen its pair. The union must be honored." Daniel blinked, trying to piece the words together. His translator buzzed, straining to keep up. "Chosen its pair, union." He glanced at the woman, who was stepping closer now, her expression unreadable. Murmurs rippled through the aliens like waves, and the warriors stiffened as though bracing for impact. The woman approached the fire, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. She moved with unhurried confidence, her every step deliberate. When she stopped before him, the elder placed a hand on her shoulder and raised his staff high. "By fire's will, the human is bound. She is his and he is hers." The meaning hit him like a punch to the gut. His stomach lurched. This wasn't just about passing a trial. This wasn't symbolic. He hadn't just proven himself to them. He had married himself to them, or more precisely to her. The woman's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes betrayed nothing. She extended her hand toward him, palm open, waiting. The crowd hushed, silence stretching taut as a blade's edge. Daniel felt the weight of it pressing down on him, the expectation of an entire culture, a world so alien yet now binding him in ways he hadn't agreed to. His heart thundered. He thought he had come here for trade talks, for diplomacy. But the fire had written a new script, one he could not walk away from. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering above hers, his mind racing with every instinct screaming against the trap he had stumbled into. Yet as their hands touched, a surge of warmth pulsed between them, different from the fire, deeper, alive. The crowd erupted in cheers, drums pounding, horns blaring as though a victory had been won. Daniel stood frozen, his hand in hers, the weight of what just happened crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The elder raised his staff once more, his voice booming. The rite is complete. The bond is sealed. The human has a wife. And just like that, Daniel realized he wasn't just a guest anymore. He was theirs. The celebration continued long after the fire dimmed. Drums pounded against the night air, and alien voices rose in chants that carried across the shoreline. Warriors danced in circles around the flame, their bodies painted with glowing pigments that flared under the torchlight. Daniel stood among them, still dazed, his hand bound in the violet woman's grip as though she had no intention of letting go. Everywhere he looked, eyes followed him. Some were filled with awe, others with resentment. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing in, heavier than armor. The translator whispered fragments in his ear, struggling to keep pace with the alien language, as their songs and chants blended into a tide of incomprehensible meaning. Still, one word repeated often enough for him to understand. Bonded. The woman at his side stood silent, regal, untouched by the chaos of celebration. She moved with the calm certainty of someone accustomed to being observed, her silver hair shimmering in the torchlight. When the revelers pressed too close, she shifted her stance, subtly placing herself between them and him. It wasn't hostility. It was protection. At last the elder raised his staff and the music quieted. The fire has spoken. Its choice cannot be denied. The human has been bound to Serenia of the Mooncrest bloodline. A ripple of voices spread through the crowd at her name. Some gasped, others cheered, and Daniel caught a few narrowed glares. Whoever Serenia was, she mattered to them. The elder's words continued, solemn and heavy. The bond is not ceremony alone, it is duty. The fire does not choose lightly. Its will must be honored by flesh and spirit alike. Daniel's stomach knotted. He didn't need a translator to catch the weight of what was being said. This wasn't a symbolic link. It was something far more binding. Serenia finally spoke, her voice low and melodic, yet sharp enough to slice through the din. I accept the fire's decree. She looked at Daniel, her eyes locking with his. Do you? Her tone held no softness, no pleading, only a challenge, as though she already knew his answer. Daniel hesitated. 100 thoughts crashed through his mind. Duty, survival, diplomacy, freedom. He wanted to deny it, to walk away. But the eyes of the entire tribe bore down on him like the weight of the ocean. To refuse now might not only dishonor Serenia, but spark hostility that would undo everything he had come here to build. His jaw clenched as he forced the words out. I accept. The translator buzzed faintly as it rendered his response into their tongue. The crowd roared with approval, the warriors slamming their weapons against stone in thunderous rhythm. The drums resumed, louder than before, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Serenia gave no outward reaction, but the faintest glimmer passed through her eyes. Relief, perhaps, or calculation. She turned, leading him away from the fire, through the throngs of chanting warriors and priests, down a path of stone that wound toward the sea. Wherever they went, the crowd parted, bowing their heads as though she carried more authority than he had guessed. When they reached the edge of the cliffs, far enough from the celebration to hear their own thoughts, Daniel finally pulled his hand free. What the hell just happened back there? He demanded, his voice low but sharp. I was supposed to prove myself, not get married. Serenia's silver hair shifted in the breeze, her violet skin glowing faintly under the moonlight. She studied him with calm intensity, unshaken by his tone. The fire does not make mistakes. It saw in you what it demanded. To deny it would have meant dishonor. For you, for me, and for the bond between our peoples. Daniel dragged a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. I didn't come here to get tied down. This wasn't the deal. Serenia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. You think this is a trap, human? It is not, it is survival. The fire chose you because it saw strength. And now that strength belongs to us both. Her words carried the weight of command, but also something else, a quiet acceptance, as if she too had been caught in this binding without choice. For the first time, Daniel saw not just the regal figure who had stood before the fire, but a woman bound by duty to forces larger than herself. He sighed, turning toward the sea. The alien towers rose in the distance, their lights pulsing faintly against the horizon. So what now? He asked, voice tired. What does this bond even mean? Serenia's gaze followed his to the distant spires. It means our lives are no longer separate. You are of my house and I of yours. You carry my name and I carry your fate. Together we stand as one before my people. She paused, her tone darkening. And there will be those who will test us, for not all believe the fire should have chosen you. Daniel's chest tightened. He had expected suspicion, maybe resistance, but to be so openly tied to one of their bloodlines. That meant enemies he didn't even understand yet. Enemies who would see him as a threat or worse, as prey. Serenia stepped closer, her voice lowering. I will not let them tear you apart, but you must learn quickly. You are no longer human alone. You are firebound. And that carries a price. Daniel met her gaze, his breath unsteady. For the first time since the Rite, he saw the truth of his situation. This wasn't a game or a misunderstanding. He wasn't just a guest among them anymore. He was part of them. And that meant his choices from here forward would shape not only his fate, but hers as well. As the drums carried faintly on the wind behind them, Daniel realized something chilling. The fire hadn't only chosen a wife for him, it had chosen a battlefield. And he had just stepped into its heart. Morning came not with the soft warmth of dawn, but with the shrill blare of horns echoing across the cliffs. Daniel woke to the sound, his body stiff from a restless night spent on stone bedding within Serenia's chamber. He rubbed his eyes and found her already awake, standing at the balcony with her silver hair catching the rising light. The trials begin today, she said without turning. Her voice was calm, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. Daniel sat up, groaning. Trials? Nobody mentioned anything about trials. Serenia finally looked back, her eyes cool and unflinching. When the fire binds two souls, the bond must be tested. To prove it is real. To prove it is strong. He swung his legs over the edge of the bedding. Let me guess. If we fail, everything falls apart. Serenia's silence was confirmation enough. She stepped toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Do not think of failure. Think only of survival. Her touch was steady, grounding, though her words carried the weight of finality. They left the chamber and descended stone steps carved into the cliffside, moving toward the vast arena that stretched between the towers. Hundreds, maybe thousands of her people filled the terraces carved into rock, their voices rising in anticipation. Drums beat in measured rhythm, the same pulse that had followed him since the fire rite. The elder stood at the arena's center, staff raised high. The bond shall be tested by fire and stone, strength of arm, clarity of mind, unity of spirit. Only then shall it be recognized as true. His words carried across the space, amplified by strange humming stones set in the walls. Daniel felt his stomach twist. This was no mere ritual, it was a public trial. Their first test began with combat. Opponents were brought forward, two warriors with skin like hammered bronze, their eyes cold with disdain. They bore spears tipped with obsidian blades, their stances disciplined and deadly. Daniel looked to Serenia, but she was already striding forward, her expression unreadable. The elder struck his staff and the battle began. The warriors charged. Serenia moved like liquid flame, sidestepping and striking with precision, her blade flashing in arcs of silver. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but he forced himself forward, snatching a fallen shield to intercept a thrust aimed for her side. The impact rattled his bones, but he held. Serenia glanced at him briefly, surprise flickering in her eyes before she pivoted and drove her knee into her opponent's chest. Together, their movements began to align, not perfect, but enough to press the warriors back. Daniel felt something stirring, as though the bond itself lent him speed and awareness. When the last warrior fell to the sand, silence gripped the crowd before erupting into roars of approval. Daniel stood panting, sweat dripping down his brow, but a fire burned in his chest. Pride not just for himself, but for what they had done together. Serenia gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement of his place beside her, but the trials were far from over. The second test came swiftly, announced without pause the riddle of the flame. A pedestal was brought forward, bearing a brazier filled with coals that glowed but did not burn. The elder spoke. The fire speaks truth only to those united. One must ask, the other must answer. If your spirits are divided, the flame shall die. Daniel's heart pounded. He had no idea what kind of riddle awaited him. Serenia placed a hand on his arm, her eyes steady. Trust me. She turned to the flame and asked a question in their tongue, too complex for the translator to catch. Then she looked at him, waiting. For a moment, panic threatened to consume him. But then something strange happened. He felt a whisper in the back of his mind, not words, but impressions. A picture of flowing water, of a bridge spanning two shores. Without knowing why, he answered, Unity. The flame flared higher, bursting into golden light. The crowd gasped, and even the elder's eyes widened. Serenia's lips curved into the faintest smile before she hid it behind her calm exterior. Daniel exhaled, his knees weak, but the brazier's light confirmed they had passed. Still, the elder was not finished. The final trial shall test the heart. Each must risk themselves for the other. Only then shall the bond be sealed. His words sent a chill through Daniel's spine. Risk himself. He glanced at Serenia, but her expression betrayed nothing. The challenge was unveiled, a pit of shifting stone and flame, bridged only by narrow pillars. At its center stood an artifact of crystal, glowing faintly with inner fire. Retrieve it together, the elder commanded. If one falls, both fail. Daniel swallowed hard, stepping forward. The heat from the pit seared his skin, and the pillars wobbled underfoot. Serenia moved with perfect balance, but even she slowed, her focus absolute. Halfway across, a stone shifted beneath Daniel's foot and crumbled into the pit. He stumbled, arms flailing. Without hesitation, Serenia lunged, catching his wrist and pulling him upright. The crowd gasped as she steadied him, their bond visible in the act itself. Daniel forced his breath steady, nodding his thanks before moving forward again. Step by step they crossed, until together they reached the glowing crystal and lifted it between them. The pit roared with flame, then fell silent. The crystal's light merged with the fire of the arena, and the elder struck his staff once more. The bond is proven. The fire accepts you. The words carried like thunder, and the crowd erupted in thunderous approval. Daniel stood beside Serenia, holding the crystal aloft. His chest heaved, but something within him had shifted. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was belonging. Against all odds, he had stood with her, and together they had passed. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing. He was no longer just a stranger among them. But as the cheers died down, Daniel caught sight of figures watching from the shadows of the terraces, figures who had not cheered, whose gazes burned with anger and suspicion. Not everyone was willing to accept what the fire had chosen, and Daniel realized then that their trials had only just begun. The arena had fallen quiet after the trials, but the silence that followed was not peace, it was anticipation. Daniel could feel it in the air as they were led back to the cliffside hall, Serenia walking beside him, with the crystal still in her grasp. The fire had declared them bonded, yet unease lingered in the shadows, a threat unspoken but heavy. As night fell, the celebration resumed, though its tone had changed. The songs were louder, the drums faster, but beneath the revelry Daniel noticed the whispers. Not everyone was celebrating their triumph. Some voices hissed his name with contempt, and more than once he caught warriors glaring with barely veiled hostility. Serenia noticed too. She leaned close, her words barely audible over the drums. They will not forgive what they see as weakness. A human bound to me? To them it dishonors our bloodline. Her silver hair brushed against his arm as she spoke, and though her tone was calm, Daniel sensed the tension in her body. He tried to sound confident, though unease knotted his chest. Then we proved them wrong. We already passed their trials. Serenia's gaze flicked to him unreadable, Passing trials is not the same as surviving enemies. She said no more, but her hand lingered against his for a moment, grounding him. The night wore on, and the revelry thinned. Daniel slipped away to the cliffside, needing space to breathe. The sea stretched endlessly below, its waves crashing against jagged stone. For a brief moment, he let himself believe the danger had passed, that perhaps the fire's choice truly had secured his place here. The illusion shattered when shadows moved behind him. 3 warriors emerged, their eyes burning with contempt. Their leader, tall and broad-shouldered, snarled in his tongue before the translator caught up. "You are not worthy." The fire erred. "Tonight the bond ends with your blood." Daniel's pulse surged. He had no weapon, only his fists and the training drilled into him back on Earth. He braced himself, but before the first strike fell, Serenia stepped from the shadows, blade in hand, her stance lethal. "You will not touch him," she said coldly. The warrior sneered, circling. "You shame yourself, Serenia. You shame us all." One lunged and steel clashed against Serenia's blade. Sparks flared as she parried, her movements sharp and unrelenting. But there were 3 of them, and even she could not hold them forever. Daniel didn't hesitate. He dove for a fallen spear lying near the arena wall, rolling as one of the warriors slashed at him. The obsidian blade whistled past his head. He came up swinging, the spear awkward but familiar enough to use. Training took over, thrust, pivot, block. He wasn't perfect, but desperation lent him speed. Together they fought back to back. Serenia's strikes were precise, cutting arcs of silver in the moonlight, while Daniel's defense was raw, survival-driven, but effective. Each time he faltered, she adjusted, filling the gaps. Each time she staggered, he caught her flank. Slowly, impossibly, they held their ground. The leader roared in frustration, charging straight for Daniel. The impact nearly tore the spear from his hands, but Daniel dug in, teeth clenched. He thought he would collapse under the brute's weight, until Serenia's blade flashed, severing the warrior's weapon arm in a spray of sparks and blood. The man fell, howling. The others faltered, then retreated into the shadows, dragging their leader with them. Their defeat did not bring relief. It brought the promise of more to come. Daniel's chest heaved as he lowered the spear, sweat dripping down his face. He looked at Serenia, whose silver hair clung to her skin, her eyes blazing with intensity. "You fought like fire itself," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. Daniel managed a shaky grin. "Guess it's starting to rub off on me." Their laughter was brief, but it carried a strange warmth in the cold night air. The next day, the elder summoned the court. The attack had not gone unnoticed, and whispers of rebellion had spread. The arena filled again, the people restless, waiting for judgment. Daniel and Serenia stood at the center, the crystal of fire glowing faintly in her hands. The elder struck his staff. The fire chose, and its trials were passed. Yet some deny its will. Such defiance cannot be ignored. His gaze swept the crowd, daring any to speak. None did. The silence was broken only by Serenia's voice. "They came for him in the night," she declared, her words ringing like steel. "But they failed because the bond is true. Together we endured not only the fire's trials, but treachery. The flame cannot be undone." She lifted the crystal high, its glow flaring in response. The crowd erupted, not in outrage, but in awe. Even those who had doubted seemed shaken by the proof before them. Daniel stood tall beside her, the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on him. But for once, he didn't feel out of place. He felt chosen. The elder raised his staff once more. "Then let it be written, the fire has bound them, and no hand shall break its will." The words echoed across the arena, sealing their fate in lore and tradition. Daniel glanced at Serenia, who met his gaze with rare softness. For the first time since the fire rite began, he didn't feel trapped. He felt partnered. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was something bigger, something that might change not only his fate, but theirs as well. As the crowd roared their approval, Daniel realized the truth. The fire hadn't only given him a wife. It had given him a people, a cause, and a bond that even blood and betrayal couldn't break. And though danger would come again, for now, he stood unafraid, because he no longer stood alone.